Thank you for joining me on my coffee break. As you are aware, having once produced a podcast that I believe me and you are the only ones to have the copy of the recordings of, you know that editing videos or even sound files is a part-time job that we had on top of our real jobs, which is why I believe you have cut back on it. But as I said, thank you for joining me on my coffee break.
Yeah.
It's good to take breaks even when you're doing a, something for your own learning experience, like editing YouTube videos.
Editing the podcast, eventually it got a lot easier as I learned more and more tricks. So I imagine it's the same with editing a YouTube video, but or video in general, but there's a lot more to video. So I would imagine it's more complicated.
I know I've asked this before, but why natural? Why do you call your podcast Natural One Gaming?
Well, at the time I was kind of looking around, I was poking around for different names, played around with a couple of different ideas. I'd seen lots of YouTube groups, and because at the time when I made the podcast, there wasn't a lot of D&D podcasts that I could find. There weren't any real Let's Plays or especially advice stuff. There were a couple Let's Plays, but there wasn't any real. There weren't any, as far as I could tell at the time. Again, um, podcasts about like advice. So that's kind of why I went with that style. But as for the name specifically, I wanted to choose something that I thought was funny and would kind of convey maybe like a sense of, I don't know, humility, I guess. Because all these other ones had these big epic names and fancy names, or they were trying to utilize you know, like Critical Role, Critical Hits and Natural 20 and Nat 20 um, were pretty common for the ones that I could find. So I went in the opposite direction because I was like, for me, the Nat 20s are cool, but when you roll a critical failure, and especially if you've got the critical failure cards, those are always really memorable moments. So I went with Natural One, and then at the same time, I did cause some confusion because a lot of the people who were going into my podcast were finding it in like gardening podcasts or like nature stuff because of the word natural. And that caused a bit of confusion, I think. I got classified improperly, even though I didn't have any of those tags under the podcast. So it was a little weird. But yeah, that's why originally is I wanted it to be something kind of funny, but opposite of what everyone else was doing.
You being the one and only storyteller told a few stories on your podcast, and I'm curious, what happened in your first D&D game the second time you went to the bridge? Because the first time in your podcast it was a TPK. What happened the second time?
It was also a TPK, although we got a little farther than the bridge. So after we ended up having to like kind of reset that game twice, I think. Uh, After everybody died, the first time the total party kill happened was when we were all um, destroyed by ogres, and then the second time was at the bridge when we all drowned in the river. So after that point, we had kind of reset it again, and we made it across the bridge this time. And on the other side of the bridge was a forest with a tower, and the tower was a wizard of some sort. And at the top of this tower was a crystal. So it was kind of like it was built almost like a lighthouse. And the way that it worked is that this crystal was um, shooting like a beam of. It was basically like a giant lens, I guess. That instead of shooting out light, it was shooting out like a giant magnifying glass, igniting and burning everything in its path, like a giant laser almost. And so there was this great big burnt out area around the tower, and it would just sort of like run in a circle. So there was a spot that had been totally destroyed by fire. And as this laser beam continued to circle around the tower, there wasn't anything to burn. So it was just sort of like almost like carving a hole around it, I guess. So we made our way in there, and it turns out that the beam has the ability to like kind of focus on one person at a time. So it blasted us, um, or somebody. I can't remember who got blasted the first time, but then we found out, you need to make good dexterity saves or reflex checks, I guess, at the time because it was third edition um, to get around the beam, and then we made it to the tower eventually, and we fought the wizard, and the wizard fight was really anticlimactic. Our DM was a little bit sad about it, but what ended up happening is we went to go fight the wizard, and then in the very first round of combat, the fighter bull rushed the wizard off the tower, and both of them died. One of the players ended up, I want to say it was the cleric, tried to steal the gem, but in the process of trying to steal the gem, ended up getting laser beamed to death. And then the two of us, so me and the one other party member, I believe a barbarian, we managed to get the gemstone, but we died shortly after when a band of raiders came to kind of deal with what was going on, and the barbarian totally fumbled up our negotiation. So,
From what I remember from your video about attributes, charisma is talking to people. Why didn't the paladin, a charisma based class, do the talking? Why did the barbarian do the talking?
well, at the time that was still like my first character. So, and I was in a group of guys who were a little bit older than me, and they were kind of at the time. I remember them getting kind of a little bit drunk. I wasn't the face of the party because I was never really personally talking. Actually, our face of the party was primarily the guy playing the barbarian.
Does the face of the party need to have good charisma?
No, like stat wise, no, doesn't need to. Like currently right now in the game, one of the games that I'm playing, the face of the party is has the lowest charisma and is a intelligence based. He's an artificer, and he's like his character is very. I don't want to say he's very like robotic, but he's definitely an intellectual above all other things. And it just so happens that his player is the one who is kind of like taking charge, actively moving the story forward. So he ends up everybody sort of turns to him to answer the questions or talk to people. And then in the other game, I have another character who is also the face of the party, and his character it doesn't have the lowest charisma score, but I think it's maybe like a 10 at most. And he's a fighter, and he just happens to be the player again. Just happens to be very very charismatic, and that falls through with the character.
What do you think about characters playing against their stats like that?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me so much as long as everybody's having fun, right? It's just kind of number based. Um, but if you and I try and balance it out a little, like if how do I say that? So like the fighter, for example, who is the talker in the one group, um, he doesn't have the charisma or the skill focus in persuasion and deception to like kind of back up what he says. But he puts such a good effort into it that I don't generally punish him for it. He might, he doesn't make checks with disadvantage or anything like that just because he doesn't have the skills. Um, but then on the other hand, one of the other players who just doesn't really like being in charge or like making the decisions has a higher charisma score and has the skill focuses in persuasion. Whenever he does go up to bat, essentially to like try and utilize his charisma and skill, um, he doesn't say the right thing. Like he's not as he himself isn't as charismatic as the other player, but I'm not going to punish him either because he's trying to play a character that is charismatic, right? It'd be like playing a wizard with 20 intelligence. Like you'd have to be like Stephen Hawking to play a wizard with 20 intelligence and also be, that type of intelligent player. But it's not going to happen, right? Um, or probably not going to happen. I don't know. Maybe Stephen Hawking played D&D, but anyways, it's never going to match up perfectly, right? You're playing a fantasy character uh, in some magical realm that can shoot, I don't know, fireballs out of their nose and jump 30 feet straight in the air. So whatever, as long as it's fun. I don't really lean on mechanics as much as I used to because now I've got the experience where I can just make a roll call, or I can just, I don't go back to the book all the time. Sometimes I'll get another player to be like, maybe check that up while I'm narrating whatever it is I'm doing, or we'll look into it later. But for the most part, it's like as long as you're having fun and you're put some effort into it, you're okay.
So you're running two 5e D&D games?
Yep. I have a game. They're alternating, so I have a game on like Saturday evening, and then every 2 weeks, and then a game on like Sunday morning every 2 weeks. Um, and I had tried to kind of get everybody under one into like one group. There was just so many people who wanted to play. I couldn't smash them all together. I'd have like 13 players or something like that, and I don't want to do that. So I kind of broke it up into two groups. One was actually just supposed to be a group that was going to last maybe a couple of weeks or a couple of sessions at least, so like a couple of months in the real world, um, to help like introduce the game to a couple people. So that game was like mostly new players, and then the other game was kind of my go-to team, my veterans, right? The group that had just finished up a 5-year campaign. We started a new campaign, and
I forgot to mention, I am drinking a tea, not a coffee, even though this is called Coffee Break. Are you drinking coffee at all?
me, I'm horribly addicted to coffee. I have like 30 ounces of coffee a day, which is actually like two extra larges from like Tim Hortons or something.
My tea's drank. This coffee break's gone a bit long. I'm gonna have to figure out how to edit 10 minutes off of it to make it fit a coffee break. But thank you for joining me. As as I said earlier, you are the one and only storyteller.
Thanks, man. It's good to talk to you again.